Calm down. I didn't come all this way for your handsome mug.
What's up everyone? Alex here. I love Final Fantasy XVI. It's got a ton of memorable characters, heart-wrenching moments, and fantastic action combat. At least that's what a lot of critics said. And they're right. I cried, laughed, and used Clive like a food processor that sliced and diced his way through his enemies. But when I put down the controller and had a chance to think about my experience, the resulting ruminations paved the way to a bunch of questions. Questions such as, where's the RPG in Final Fantasy XVI? Or, what's the point in all of this gear that barely makes me powerful? And if you love the game like I do and had similar questions crop up, this might have made you feel all sorts of uncomfortable. Together, we're gonna answer these questions and more by taking a look at Creative Business Unit 3, and how their work on the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy XIV informed much of 16's design. We'll also take the time to recognize the many things we love about Final Fantasy XVI, as well as identifying the other things that it's chosen to leave on the table. My aim for this review isn't to change your opinions on the game. That would be foolish. Rather, my hope is that our search can uncover some clarity that can lead us to a deeper appreciation of it, despite our own lingering opinions. Our first stop on the search is Final Fantasy XVI's combat. While the core of 16's combat is based on character action games, the most striking part of its design is that it provides lots of combo opportunities without forcing us to memorize lengthy combo strings. Other character action games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta provide you with a lengthy list of combos that execute different attacks depending on the order you press its buttons. Instead, Final Fantasy XVI gives us the ability to map these powerful attacks to specific buttons tied to specific icons, which sits at the heart of the game's combat system. You're able to equip 3 different icons with 2 unique attacks and 1 special ability each, giving you a total of 6 unique attacks that you'll have access to. This design also allows you to reorder complementary icons to aid you in creating an offensive strategy that you can easily remember and execute. The complexity of the icon system expands a lot more when you start spending skill points to upgrade them, to such a degree where mastered icon attacks can be equipped onto different icon loadouts. And if you don't like the skill that you just unlocked, you can refund any and all of your skill points with a quick press and hold of a button. This level of customization allows for a kind of combat self-expression that is reminiscent of the most exciting martial arts films, letting us live our action hero fantasies without encountering the challenges found in other character action games. It's as if Final Fantasy XVI is trying to push us to try out all of its unique and fun attacks so that we can create a setup that we can be happy with. This gives us the confidence to know that even if we don't like certain abilities, that we can just easily allocate these points towards ones that we really like or are interested in trying out. This low-stakes way of crafting builds is something that is uniquely possible with Final Fantasy XVI's design, and it would behoove you to know that this actually has its roots in the endgame freelancer build in Final Fantasy V, which also allowed you to equip 2 command abilities from any job. As much as its combat and progression systems are fun to play with, I encountered a problem that I didn't expect to run into. Final Fantasy XVI is actually a bit on the easy side. And by that, I don't mean that I was expecting the game to be crushingly difficult. Tougher challenges or being able to tackle the game at a higher difficulty level would have helped bring importance to these build choices. I wanted to feel as though all of the customization and planning I've done meant something. Thankfully, Final Fantasy Mode completely remixes enemy placement, as well as making existing enemies a ton beefier and more challenging. But alas, you gotta beat the game first to unlock it. The decision to tune the game easier isn't happenstance. and a similar thing regularly happens in Final Fantasy XIV with every expansion. Since the release of Heavensward back in 2015, Final Fantasy XIV started creating 8-man raids with 2 difficulty levels, Story and Savage. The Story difficulty is tuned to ensure that players are able to team up with random people that can tackle a moderate challenge without much coordination. This was to ensure that everyone is able to experience the stories behind these raids. Upon beating the story raids, you then unlock the harder Savage raids, which reward better gear in exchange for spending more time tackling difficult versions of each fight. While it's certainly possible that CBU3 thought that tuning 16's difficulty easier would help its players experience its story fully, there's another potential reason. By making Final Fantasy Mode a second playthrough option, this allows CBU3 to tune every encounter with the knowledge that we'll have every iconic attack and ability to equip and use. This lets them place enemies that they know will truly challenge us with a peace of mind that we'll have every tool in our arsenal to overcome these deadly obstacles. On top of its difficulty comes the question of the importance of 16's armor and weapons. The disconnect comes from the idea that equipping the best weapons and armor available will help you plow through enemies with minimal effort. Indeed, even when equipped with the best gear and facing enemies the same level as them, some players have said that these enemies feel spongy and take too many hits. So why does the gear feel this way then? The answer lies in one simple truth. Final Fantasy XVI is a skill-based game. What I mean by this is that Final Fantasy XVI is an action RPG where many of its systems, its combat, progression, down to the weapons and armor you equip, are all present to serve you, the player. By keeping up with new weapons and armor, and leveling up using side quests, we're making Clive more resilient and powerful, narrowing the difficulty gap between ourselves and the enemies around us. While this might all sound obvious, consider one other thing that's also possible thanks to this design. It's theoretically possible for an expert player to defeat the entire game by completely ignoring the best gear and keeping Clive's levels as low as possible. In fact, many have taken on similar challenges even before the game came out, with players posting videos of their no-hit runs of the demo on social media. The assertion that the gear and weapons are merely there to aid us is supported by the presence of timely accessories in Final Fantasy XVI. Producer Naoki Yoshida described the timely accessories as ways for new action game fans to make certain commands more accessible. These commands include auto combos that can simply be executed by pressing one button repeatedly, slowing down time before an incoming attack hits to help players dodge in time, and even allowing Torgal to act on his own. I want to make it clear that while the seeming importance of gear and weapons feels diminished in Final Fantasy XVI, it is by no means useless. Just merely equipping the lowest level weapons and armor and taking on a difficult hunt is proof enough of its profound impact. Rather, it seems to me that the goal of 16's combat design is to let us know in full confidence that no matter how we choose to play the game, that it will support our decision in kind, without putting out unnecessary roadblocks. It is through these self-imposed challenges that Final Fantasy XVI's combat depth shows, and a road not commonly taken by other RPGs of this style. This leads me to a combat demonstration that combat designer Ryota Suzuki did at the launch party for 16, where he took Maximilian Dood's setup, underleveled as he was, and managed to take down a difficult hunt just by playing well. And that moment, in and of itself, felt to me was the ultimate demonstration of what CBU3 wants us to take away from the game. In Final Fantasy XVI, you own your experience. Which brings me to the question of why Final Fantasy XVI needed to be a character action game. Ever since I've watched his many live streams and interviews on Final Fantasy XIV, producer Naoki Yoshida has always demonstrated a kind of practicality that very few game directors demonstrate. In Final Fantasy XIV, for example, he's not above reusing enemy models from previous Final Fantasies if it were going to achieve the same result. It's only by considering Yoshida's pragmatist approach and looking at 14's design that we can draw parallels between its world and dungeon design to that of 16. In both games, big main story plot points introduce us to brand new locations, and to get a better feel for the culture and the state of our surroundings, we're asked to do menial tasks as part of our journey, which helps expand our understanding of the places we're visiting. The trouble with introducing these concepts in Final Fantasy XVI is that it slows down the pace of the game too much, creating huge gaps in between combat sequences. Final Fantasy XIV's dungeon design has evolved to an extent that not only has it improved its sense of place, a complaint from fans back in the early days of the MMO, but whose player experience has also been streamlined to ensure that we can quickly grasp that we're going in the right direction with minimal fuss. Many of Final Fantasy XVI's dungeons demonstrate both of these design principles, and given the team's extensive experience with 14, it just made sense for them to design 16's dungeons in a similar way. Because of the more confined and straightforward nature of its dungeon design, Final Fantasy XVI needed a battle system that offered combat depth and variety that could keep our attention from beginning to end. And while Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO, many of that game's challenges involved dodging things in real time and avoiding huge attack markers on the ground and acting accordingly. We could easily answer this question now by simply saying that eventually Ryota Suzuki, who worked on Devil May Cry 5, joined the team, and therefore Final Fantasy XVI turned into a character action game. But this ignores the fact that Suzuki also worked on games like Dragon's Dogma and, much to my surprise, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And considering his work on Dragon's Dogma, Final Fantasy XVI theoretically could have had controllable party members, much like how you could command pawns in said game. Those things considered, did something else influence 16's trajectory towards character action? Part of the reason why could be that prior Final Fantasies didn't feel truly committed to the idea of action gameplay. I'm specifically talking about Final Fantasy XV and Final Fantasy VII Remake here. And before I continue, I want to point out that I actually really like both of these games, and each has their own pluses and minuses that would be too great and tangential to cover in its entirety here. But when you look at both games, they didn't exhibit the same kind of fluidity and responsiveness that 16 provides, which is something that many action game fans look for. This is due to the desire of its designers to onboard turn-based RPG fans towards an action system that would make for an easy transition. The problem with this approach is that it compromises the design on both ends, creating an action game with turn-based fans first, which then alienates the expectations of longtime action game fans. Additionally, having both games offer full party control means that we're spending just as much time healing our comrades, if not more, than actually dealing damage, which is what makes the action combat fun. And for having to do all of this micromanaging anyway, this adds more fuel to the idea that these games should have been turn-based to begin with. By making Final Fantasy XVI a character action game, not only do we not have to worry about babysitting the AI, but it also lets us better engage with an important quality of Final Fantasy: the sense of journeying alongside companions through beautiful and sometimes deadly locales. And despite not having direct control over other characters, we're able to utilize the aid of at least one, our pet Torgal, who can help us either extend combos or offer heals. But that's if we wanted to be that hands-on. As an exercise, I did try to think of a what-if scenario had CBU3 chosen to make a turn-based Final Fantasy instead, only to wind up with the realization that this would have been a catastrophic decision. There are simply too many things that CBU3 would need to learn in order to make a good turn-based game. And while much of the team are fans of said games, that doesn't necessarily equal in experience making them. It's like if you tried to ask a mechanic who has worked on passenger cars for 15 years to all of a sudden perform open-heart surgery. Sure, both occupations involve tinkering with internal parts, but one is certainly not equal to the other. Whereas CBU3 working on a character action game is like asking the same experienced mechanic to work on a big truck. Both types of vehicles may be different, but there's enough overlap in knowledge that the mechanic can confidently work on it. That said, CBU3's pragmatism also extends to the creation of Final Fantasy XVI's story, and once again, we can see the parallels between Final Fantasy XIV and XVI here. Both 14 and 16 have engaging stories, each with their own unique flavor. But one thing that ties both together is the writer's intimate knowledge of the series and the inspiration they take from the larger Final Fantasy universe. There are moments in both games that are similar, but not quite the same, as events depicted in earlier Final Fantasies, using past stories like different colors of paint and using them as inspiration to paint new stories. Anyone inexperienced with CBU3's work might think that this is lazy or that this is somehow devoid of originality, but the kinds of stories that CBU3 is able to create with these are of such a dizzying variety that they're able to deftly blur the lines between the resulting scenes from its seeming inspiration. So much so that you might not even notice it the first time around. To that end, I do want to talk about the oppressiveness that permeates the entirety of Final Fantasy XVI. While moments of levity do exist, the rest of the game is filled to the brim with a seeming hopelessness. Indeed, the socio-political mess that Valisthea is in, as well as the fight for its mother crystals, complicates matters the most, along with the slavery brought upon the bearers, which are a race of humans who have been gifted with magic. This, of course, draws parallels from multiple Final Fantasies, reminding me of Espers in Final Fantasy VI and how they're treated as commodities, and the Garlean Empire's inability to use magic in Final Fantasy XIV. The injection of political strife in 16 is inspired by the team's admiration of Yasumi Matsuno's work, who's best known for Final Fantasy Tactics and the Ogre Battle series. In both, Matsuno tells a powerful political story that's got its roots firmly planted to the ground, while using either Final Fantasy or Ogre Battle as the paintbrush to provide additional flavor to the world. The main difference here is that this politicking is actually the added flavor in 16. But perhaps the biggest achievement in Final Fantasy XVI's story is that it made us care about its characters. And because of its oppressiveness, every dungeon we'll encounter and every big story beat that loomed on the horizon made us fear for our friends on screen. This is all thanks to the masterful performances of 16's voice cast, breathing life into these characters as the cliche goes. Seriously, if I could name every voice actor from this game, I would. But Ben Starr as Clive, Ralph Ineson as Sid, and Susanna Fielding as Jill were so incredible that theirs and everyone's performances in-game set a new high bar for me for productions of this magnitude. A final word about the story that I want to point out is that Final Fantasy XVI does a fantastic job of portraying a looming threat in the background, ultimately culminating in a villain that felt ever-present throughout the journey. This is something that most Final Fantasies often reveal towards the back half of the game, and to see this villain's influence early on really brought up a lot of fun mysteries to solve as we're playing through the game. And last but certainly not least, I want to commend the fantastic soundtrack composed by Masayoshi Soken. Soken is yet another Final Fantasy XIV veteran who's using all of his experience to score 16 to great effect, and the resulting tracklist is composed of songs that feature many familiar flourishes across the entire series' history. These serve to evoke our memories of previous Final Fantasies, from the classic prelude and main theme to slightly more obscure callbacks, such as the first few notes of PS1 era battle themes. But to only say that he's merely tapping into our nostalgia ignores the fact that Soken's more complex compositions take us on an emotional journey throughout Valisthea, and one that truly enhances the impact of many of the game's numerous highs and lows. Every new Final Fantasy has been surrounded by talk of its legacy and meaning, and Final Fantasy XVI certainly upholds this tradition. But what's so fascinating about the game, regardless of how we see it, is that it's an evolution of sorts, and a continued acknowledgement that the series is no longer content to be confined within a specific genre. And while we began a search to help understand parts of Final Fantasy XVI through the lens of its developers, we've realistically only scratched the surface, as its makers have left us plenty of messages to contemplate. Things like questioning what it is to share a name with something so revered and what it means for its legacy. And if this sounded very meta to you, that's because it probably is. There is so much to be gleaned from Final Fantasy XVI that goes beyond its entertainment value. And while it is a damn good action game, flaws and all, it sure has everyone talking about it.